Hi everyone. Today I want to talk about Sireh marriages or temporary marriages in mainly in Iran. So Sireh is a tradition that predates Islam in the Arabian Peninsula. It remains a legitimate function among the Iranian Twelver Shiites, um, while Omar, the second caliph, outlawed Sireh. The Shiites still have chosen to view this command as optional and non-binding. So the Shiites practice Sireh. However, even though it is banned for the Sunnis and in Sunni communities, some forms of the custom have also survived and thrived in Sunni communities as well, such as unions known as Orfi or Masyar. As its Shiite cousin, Sunni temporary marriages have mostly functioned in private and in secret until recent times. Shiites often argue for the legitimacy of temporary marriage using Quranic passages such as Surah 4, Ayah 24, noting that the Prophet himself permitted it. Shiites hold that, and I'm quoting, that which has been made lawful and halal by the Prophet is halal till the day of resurrection, and that which has been forbidden or haram is haram till the day of resurrection, end quote. Morteza Motahari, whose ideas about gender relations had a profound impact on the Islamic revolution, agreed that Omar had forbidden temporary marriage. However, he maintained that this command was a political act and not a legal ruling based on the Sharia. So temporary marriage has survived and remained historically controversial. In spite of its legality, however, the value and popularity of temporary marriage has fluctuated among communities over the time. Now, ideologically, Shiite doctrines draw a line between sireh marriages and nikah marriages, or we can say temporary marriages and the formal marriages. In contemporary Iran, the most significant difference between these two marriages are um, included in the following items that I will be reading for you. So the first one is determining the duration of sireh is a necessary condition. And this is in Article 1057 of the Civil Law in Iran. Second one is determining the amount of mehriye or the dowry, and it is a necessary condition. And the absence of that in the mehriye, the mehriye amount of mehriye in the contract causes the cancellation of the marriage, and this is based on Article 1095 of the Civil Law. The third item is in temporary marriage, the husband is not required to pay alimony or nafaqeh to the wife unless it is stated in the contract. And this one is based on Article 1113 of the Civil Law. The fourth condition is temporary marriage does not require formal divorce, and the separation of the couple happens at the end of the stated time in the contract. And this one is in the Article 1120 of the Civil Law. The fifth item is the temporary wife is required to keep a da or a period of abstinence for 2 menstrual cycles or 45 days, while for the nikah wife, 3 menstrual cycles are required. The number 6 is in temporary marriage, the couples do not inherit from one another. And this is in Article 94 and 1077 of the Civil Law. But these two marriages also share some principles, and I'm going to list 4 of these principles here. So the marriage in both of them, the marriage must be registered. In both, it must be consensual, and the couple must be at the legal age of marriage. And finally, for virgin girls, the father's or guardian's permission is required. So while both nikah and sigha marriages are supposed to be consensual, a double standard results from the perception of female virginity and the female body as male possession in both types of marriage. Such assumptions deny women agency and require female passivity, which is evident in the language also that surrounds temporary marriages. Now, the word used for temporary marriage in Persian is ازدواج موقت, which literally means temporary marriage, or sighe, which refers to a type of contract. However, the former is mainly used by the ulama or the clerics, and the latter is a pejorative word used colloquially to refer to a temporary wife and often to the man involved in the contract. Whereas a man performs sighe, a woman either becomes or is a sighe, emphasizing the autonomy of the man as opposed to the passivity of the woman in this marital configuration. Similarly, the Arabic word for sighe is mota, which has its root in the word mata, meaning benefiting or taking advantage of or enjoyment, pleasure, or to have the benefit of using something. The same meaning has been used also in the Quran in the ayah 126 of Surah Baqarah and ayah 24 of Surah Hud. Now, the etymology and the common usage of the word sighe or muta' is in itself testimony to the truth that these types of marriages do not allow subjectivity and agency for women while they provide men with full autonomy. From this perspective, temporary marriages are simply another way for the male-dominated system to police the female body by keeping women passive and subordinate. Now, although sighe gives a degree of sexual freedom to women compared to nikah marriages, the gender roles, that is, the expectation of female passivity and male activity, still is dominant in these unions. So in short, the practice is more complex than it appears on the surface. Now, it is also important to note that after the termination of sighe marriages, a woman has to observe that 2 menstrual cycle or 45 days of abstinence period. Such abstinence has been justified historically as a measure to determine whether or not sighe marriages, the sighe marriage has resulted in pregnancy. A child conceived in this period is considered legitimate and theoretically has inheritance rights equal to those of her or his nikah siblings. However, the law always sides with the man if he denies the legitimacy of the child and his own paternity. Therefore, while sighe unions might provide women with some level of social mobility, they do not provide security for the woman or the children. Sighes also come with gender-biased stipulations and conditions. For example, a man can contract as many simultaneous sighe wives as he desires or sighe marriages as he desires, compared to a woman who is restricted to entering sighe marriages one at a time and also maintaining that abstinence period. Now, it is commonly suggested that sireh prevents society from falling into social and sexual chaos. According to the theologian Jafar Sobhani Tabrizi, in a society where sireh is not socially recognized and nikah is not always possible, free association between men and women may result in the spread of sex work and social corruption. In these cases, temporary marriage is considered a good solution. Now, Sobhani Tabrizi considers sireh beneficial for the following reasons. One, those who cannot afford to marry formally have a simple solution to their sexual problems. Two, free association between the genders requires no commitments, but temporary marriage has rules and regulations and requires commitments for the couple, particularly considering any children out of these marriages because they are legitimate and have all the rights that children of nikah have. And three, temporary marriage can be used as a trial marriage for getting to know the partner before formally marrying them. So Sobhani Tabrizi's suggestion, of course, about sireh as a solution for bringing order back to a corrupt society, quote unquote corrupt society, is similar to the stance held by other clerics as well. It is also important to note that there are so many different versions and various types of sireh marriages, and some are sexual while others are non-sexual, as feminist anthropologist Shahla Ha'eri has delineated it in her magnificent book, Law of Desire. For instance, sireh associated with pilgrimage is reserved for local and traveling male pilgrims who would like to secure temporary wives for the duration of their pilgrimage. Also, older women who cannot embark on a journey to Mecca because of physical impairments can hire someone else, usually a sayyid, to make the trip for them. Now, for the Sayyid to take the trip or the journey on behalf of this older woman, they must arrange a type of non-sexual sireh before embarking on his proxy pilgrimage. Another type of sireh is where a woman makes a vow and in turn initiates the offer and negotiates the terms of the contract. This is called sireh nazari, sireh nazri, which seems to occur around the shrines of religious leaders. Believing in the religious merit of the act or the sabab, a woman may make a vow for herself or her daughter that should her wish come true, she would then contract a sireh, often with a locally revered sayyid. In this type of sireh, the woman often approaches a cleric directly and conveys her desire to become a sireh. Now, sireh nazri and pilgrimage sireh may coincide with one another. Either a vow nazr is made and then the pilgrimage is taken, or the pilgrimage itself becomes the object of the vow. In addition to pilgrimage and vow sireh, a man can also contract sireh during his travels for trade or while he's at war and away from his wife. This type of sireh during war or business travel can follow several variations. It may be contracted when a man travels from city to city, engaging in short-term sirehs in each one of these cities, or he may take a sireh woman along with him on his journey. Now, the Qajar royal family set this trend. For instance, Nasiruddin Shah and many of his courtiers would leave their wives behind in the harems and take along sireh wives when they were traveling. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, non-Iranians and non-Muslims too sometimes took advantage of this custom. So European Christians, for example, who came through Iran would sigher young Christian Armenian or Assyrian girls with the knowledge and consent of their families, who saw this as a great honor, basically. Of course, a man does not necessarily need to inform his formal wife of these temporary unions, and her consent is not required. Most men keep their sigher marriages secret, which contributes to the stigma and isolation which sigher women experience. The nature of these secret relations inherently deny subjectivity to sigher women and require them to remain invisible and vulnerable. Now, while sigher commonly can be used during travel, there are variations of these temporary marriages that do not necessitate any traveling. One such type is the sigher between a live-in maid and the man of the family that employs her. Now, since it is culturally problematic to have no-mahram or legally and religiously unrelated female maids at home, this type of sigher legalizes this working relationship, making it possible for the maid to carry on household duties without having to observe cultural norms tied to sex segregation or the etiquettes of dressing and veiling. In the context of this type of sigher, some conservative families also contract sigers between their young maids and their sons to prevent the young men from frequenting brothels. Some maids begin their positions on the condition of being a sigher, often non-sexual, to the master of the house. In this type, what sigher women gain is very pragmatic. For example, in the later years of the Pahlavi regime, there was a so-called maid agency or agence mustakhdemi. By claiming a married status via sigher with the company's help, a maid had a form of security that could enable her to ward off the proposition of marriages from an employer. However, the most pragmatic form of this marriage occurs when a wife takes it upon herself to arrange a sigher for her husband to divert his libidinal energy. Now, this arrangement also gives the wife the power to manipulate the sigher partner with whom the husband will be engaging. Barrenness, which is grounds for divorce in Shia Islam, is a reason for an infertile wife to find, for example, a sigher woman, a sigher wife for her husband. In this context, all parties are invested in the husband's procreation with the sigher wife. An excellent example of such sigher arrangements can be found in Bibi Khanum Astarabadi's Ma'ayib al-Rejal, a Voice of Men, where she basically recounts her own experiences with temporary marriage. In this case, to influence her husband through sex, the wife uses the practice. So Bibi Khanum tells the story of her marriage and how she encouraged her husband to sigher a female servant. However, the plan went wrong. The temporary wife asked the husband to expel Bibi Khanum from the household. Of course, the female servant's interest was only financial gain, and when she achieved it, the servant left and the couple remained. So Bibi Khanum's story indicates that there is no permanent security for women in any type of marriages, let alone in any type of marriage, let alone in temporary type. Another non-sexual type of marriage is sigher mahramiyat, which is roughly translated as permissible familiarity, which creates this affinal kinship, enabling the woman to socially interact freely with males and avoid segregation laws. Now, it is the means to unveil a woman by placing her in a legally affinal category. Sexual intercourse is not the purpose of this form of sigher, but lifelong lifelong kinship, fictive kinship relationships are formed. This kind of marriage is much more publicly and socially acknowledged and accepted. The ambiguity inherent in such non-sexual sighe marriages is, however, modeled by the fact that these non-sexual marriages that have non-sexual clause, that clause can be invoked or revoked according to a woman's wishes. So should she change her mind and wish to become a sexual sighe, she can declare this intent to the man. Sighe mahramiyat can even take place between two non-consenting children or an adult and a child. It has been widely performed by Iranians of all classes and backgrounds and is not culturally devalued as a sexual sighe often is. A sighe mahramiyat can exist between an adult man and one or two or several prepubescent girls for the purpose of making them mahram or legally religiously affiliated and affinal, allowing the women to unveil themselves in the presence of this man. This is a way of extending kinship systems or resisting some stringent gender norms. It can also occur during group travels when people who are traveling are not mahram, but if a group of people that travels together and the men and women are all mahrams, then there's no worry about veiling etiquettes and gender segregation. So sighe mahramiyat can also happen for a male servant of a low rank who has to go to a household where moral codes are strictly observed. If a sighe were in place, then it would be acceptable for him to come and go as he pleased without the woman needing to maintain veiling etiquette. In addition, sighe mahramiyat can also function as a facilitator of these decisions. More traditional families have historically used sighe mahramiyat to facilitate a suitor's decision about whether or not formally marry a given woman. Now, this type of sighe makes it easier for the opposite genders to socialize without being preoccupied with the veiling requirement or gender segregation. A prevalent form specific to the shrine in the city of Mashhad, Imam Reza's shrine, is sighe bala sar agha, or sighe over the head of the master, with the master referring to the Shiite 8th Imam Reza, who is buried in Mashhad. When two families arrange for a nikah marriage, they allow a sighe mahramiyat in the shrine, and then the couple returns outside to their relatives. Depending on the family tradition, this may take place before the nikah marriage. This type of sighe is expected to be non-sexual until the time of the nikah. Similar to a form of temporary matchmaking that eliminates the need for a chaperone. Other types of sighe were sanctioned after the Islamic Revolution of 1979. Immediately after the revolution, the regime began an intensive campaign to rehabilitate the reputation of sighe. They introduced it from an entirely new perspective, purifying, in their view, the institution of some of its negative cultural connotations. The regime presented sighe as an example of the progressive foresight of Islamic teachings. Through public forums like mosques, schools, mass media, the regime began to re-educate the public about what it considered to be the true meaning of sighe marriages. By formally encouraging it, the administration thrust it into public consciousness. Seizing upon the idea of the non-sexual sighe, some of the government's leaders created yet another form of sighe called trial marriage. The clerics argued that the unmarried youth who cannot afford nikah and a family life should not be forced to go through a period of asceticism, and that if they followed the prescription offered by temporary marriage, they could respond to their urges in a thoroughly moral and legal way. However, this was a state tactic used to police national sexuality. Trial marriage was only endorsed for unmarried men, but not for unmarried women due to the importance of female virginity for unmarried women. In addition to trial marriage, the regime introduced penance sire. Immediately after the revolution, the regime bulldozed the red light district and arrested, jailed, and even executed some of the sex workers. Others were taken to a government-occupied mansion in northern Tehran, destined for a form of detention that the regime termed rehabilitation and purification. Assuming that financial necessity was behind sex work, the center provided room and board for the former sex workers and in return expected help with the chores. The women were forbidden from leaving the premises and were under constant surveillance, much like a detention camp. Finally, final penance was reached when the women were completely rehabilitated, according to government standards, of course. These women were then expected to be sires to a Revolutionary Guard or a soldier. While some women reportedly chose to take this option to salvation, many others were forced into various sire arrangements against their will. The rationale behind such arrangements was that a divorced, widowed, or unmarried woman was a source of temptation and immorality, and thus wrongdoings were prevented through entering into sire. Financial donations poured into these centers from citizens who wanted to help the revolutionary programs. Along with penance sire, there was also the penal sire. As soon as the factionalism between the new regime and the opposition became evident, a purge of dissidents began in the 1980s. Since many of these arrested were young teenage girls, the regime was faced with a predicament. If the girls were executed as virgins, they would go straight to paradise according to Islamic law. It is widely believed that these young girls were forced into sire marriages with their jailers, who were given the job of deflowering them, and one can, interpret this as rape. This sexual assault allegedly dissolved the bride's purity and innocence, and thus, if executed, they would not go to paradise. Now, these are all the various types of information that I just listed for you. They are all, I have paraphrased them from Shahla Ha'iri's wonderful book. Sire marriages have been controversial throughout the history of Iran. However, in modern Iran, according to author Zohre Aghayani, women have reached a point where they do not want to marry just any random suitor. In other words, among their various options, they either do not choose anyone, or if they do choose, they choose the one they prefer. So formal marriage, or nikah, which was once the foundation for establishing a stable family, is no longer favorable for the youth. Secret relationships and temporary marriages that result in the crumbling of the family unit have become a trend for various reasons, and it is believed that temporary marriage can solve the problems of the youth in some cases. However, if it becomes the norm, formal marriage, which is the cornerstone of a healthy society, will face serious threats. Instead, there should be plans for raising women's awareness about their rights, because when women gain confidence in themselves, according to Al-Ayani, they may well prefer to remain unmarried and alone than to undergo the consequences of a marriage which is doomed from the very beginning. Agayani's statement is mirrored in a qualitative study conducted by Ahmadi, Barari, and Esmaili in 2009-2010. Interviewing 395 women and men in Tehran, the study shows that about 25% of the interviewees were interested in Sigeh, while 50% claimed that they had no information about it, and only 15% declared that they knew the rules and regulations of Sigeh. The interviews revealed that the most important response reported for not getting involved in Sigeh were the societal stigma and disagreements of families and spouses. However, the interviewees believed that Sigeh could be a way to avoid secret and illegitimate Western-type relationships for the youth. They indicated that it is a religious, legal, and legitimate way to decrease the number of social and sexual problems such as rapes. Study participants explained that temporary marriage prevents the youth from sexual corruption or sex work. It can prepare the path for a formal marriage, and it is a socially acceptable way to satisfy one's sexual needs. Comparing the interviewees' perspectives to one another, the study concluded that men, unmarried individuals, employed persons, and people living in the south of Tehran, as well as those who have witnessed temporary marriages in their families previously, showed more interest in Sigeh. The study explains that while 25% of the interviewees showed a willingness to enter Sigeh, the prevalence of the practice itself among the interviewees was only 9%. This discrepancy might indicate the hesitation of the participants to engage in a socially stigmatized Sigeh practice. Research shows that various factors impact women's perspectives of temporary marriage and thus their decision to engage or not in temporary marriage. Some of these factors include social class, education, marital status, and their personal experiences. Kalantari, Fasai, and Rezonia's recent research in 2014 shows that some women think of Sigeh as functional and essential solution for those who cannot afford to formally marry, while others believe that Sigeh primarily only provides an opportunity to pursue their desire for sexual diversity or satisfy sexual needs. Those who believe in the functionality of the referred to as their financial, emotional, and psychological needs or matters of security and respect, their lack of interest in formal marriage and its responsibilities, the lack of opportunity for formal marriage, they saw Sigeh as preparation for formal marriage and their relative preference for relationship outside of the norm, such as premarital sex. They believe that in the absence of the possibility of having a formal family, temporary marriage can be a flexible option for addressing one's emotional, sexual, and social needs. For instance, one woman's reason was that because a divorced woman is subject to ludicrous proposals, all those who I never thought in my family and friends who used to call me sister in public would secretly suggest illicit relationships. This woman's response hints at the societal pressures that a divorced woman may face regarding her sexuality. It is also evidence that a divorced woman is seen as sexually accessible and available even to her family and friends. Women who view temporary marriage unfavorably see Sireh as a threat to the functions of the institution of the family. They believe that temporary marriage postpones the establishment of formal family and deprives youth of the potential for future nikah. To these women, temporary marriage can lead to a sordid lifestyle. In addition, sociocultural and religious pressures endorsing Sireh facilitate the process of temporary marriage. Of note in this discussion is that women who have never had experience with temporary marriage view financial need as the most important and salient factor in mediating the need for sireh. Those who have had the experience, however, consider the emotional fulfillment and personal security as the most important factors when deciding to enter temporary marriage. As we can see, the various views on sireh shows the conditions and reasons for entering temporary marriage remain complicated and multi-layered. In my next talk video for next week, I'm going to talk about sireh and historically in the history of modern Iran.